Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my top 10 books of 2017. These books aren't going to be in the order from least favourite to most favourite. These books are going to go in the order that I read them this year because it's a top 10 and I believe that you should read every one of these books. It was a bit difficult to choose these 10 because there are quite about 6 honourable mentions that I toyed with, and some of these books are in here simply because I have thought about them a lot longer and more in depth than I have thought about other books, but I will talk about those ones when I get to them. The first book on this list, the first favourite book of 2017 is Homegoing by Elsie. I finished reading this on the 10th of January this year. And it is a book that I have gone on to recommend to a ton of people. If I remember correctly, I read this book in one sitting basically. There was something about the prose and the characters that really spoke to me. I do have a review for this that I will link down below. I liked the way that Elsie told the story because whilst it becomes something of a family saga in that we are following a different member of this family from the ancestors to the descendants throughout the centuries, it also links back to certain characters and how decisions made by our ancestors can influence our decisions today and our lives today, and the people who came before us are the ones who are making decisions for us centuries down the line even though they don't know it. And it's this very great look at a butterfly effect through like your family history, and it also changes the way that we would normally look at a novel, in that usually it is one character who is making mistakes themselves and their decisions are going on to kind of have this domino effect, I should have said before, and each of their decisions is influencing their next decision, whereas here the characters don't really have that choice given to them because it has already been decided for them. It has brilliant prose, there are some darker scenes, it's emotive, there is pathos, and there is this tenderness to the prose that I really appreciated, and it is a book that I am definitely saving. I am looking forward to rereading it, and I do question whether at some point it would be nice to read this book but not read it as quickly, because I do think that I have forgot some things, but there are very memorable characters that do stick in my mind and very memorable scenes that I have used in conversation to tell people why they ought to buy this book. The next favourite is The Throwback Special by Chris Backelder, and I finished this book on the 19th of January. This is a book that I didn't think that I would include, because when I first read this book way back in January, I don't think that I actually ever uploaded my review, because I recorded a review for this book a few times and I could never quite capture my thoughts on it, because whilst it is an incredibly slim volume of work and it talks about white middle-aged men being white middle-aged men, and I thought that it was going to be incredibly boring. There were people calling this humorous. It was a National Book Award finalist, as we can see from this sticker. And there were people calling it humorous in reviews, and then I saw people really hating it in reviews. And it was one of those books that was recommended to me from one of these lists last year as like books that we didn't hear enough about. I also didn't think I'd like it because, not to be horrible, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship sometimes with American literature. But this is a book that has stuck in my mind, which I didn't expect it to, and I didn't expect the stories to stick in my mind. But then I keep thinking about this book, and I keep thinking about, even though the prose was somewhat, to me at the time of reading it, it was somewhat simplistic, there is a message and an almost lingering of, not necessarily characters, but there's a lingering of feeling and themes that has stuck with me throughout the year. And when I was looking through all of my books that I read this year, I knew that this was one that was definitely going on here. There are a few that I always knew would definitely be on this list, and this is one of them. This is one that, although there have been books that I have enjoyed more that haven't made it onto this list, this book goes in for having this lingering effect that makes me want to reread the book and see just why I feel this way. I can't remember character names, but I can remember the situations they got themselves into, and I can remember this talk of racism and this talk of just what it means to be a man nowadays, and how our ideas of masculinity changing is also affecting older men, because the ideas of masculinity when they were younger are a lot different than what they are now. And it's kind of like this recalibration of masculine roles in society. And the microcosm that Chris Backelder puts them underneath to like analyse them and discuss them works really well for me, because it puts these characters into a very hyper-masculine situation where they're trying to recapture their youth. And I don't know why this book still lingers, and I don't know why this book appeals to me to read, but there's just something within this book that makes me want to tell everybody to read it, because it's a book that I really want to discuss and sink my teeth into again. Next we have Pachinko by Min-Yin Lee, and I finished this book on the 26th of February. Once again, this was a book that I read over a period of 2 days, but there is only one reason why it took me 2 days, and that was because of sleep. Because I got home from work on the Saturday and opened this book and read quite a lot of it straight away. And then the next day, once I'd finished looking after my nephew, I finished this book. I thought the prose was brilliant. I have seen some criticisms of the prose saying that the writing is somewhat simplistic and they don't understand why so many people adore this book, and that has just increased my want to go back and reread this book. These books that I include on my favourite list are usually books that I want to reread, plan on rereading, plan on looking into more in the future. Pachinko follows the character of Sonia, and she becomes pregnant in Korea. She's quite young, and a priest takes pity on her, and they end up marrying, and it does become this marriage that is of love. It is a family saga, and it reveals more to me about Korean-Japanese relations that I didn't know about. It reveals more about a side of the world that I know nothing about. And I first saw this book mentioned over by Joss on Scribbles Reads, I believe. I thoroughly adore this book. I found it quite pacey. Whilst I did dislike some things that happened in the latter third of this novel, and even though it's 500 and something pages, I wish that it was longer. I wish that the writer had taken that time to craft a final third act as well as she had crafted the first two. This book still has to be on this list for the mere fact that it does stick in my mind, and the mere fact that I really felt for these characters. And to me it did feel a bit like Tess of the D'Urbervilles. You know, like if we moved Tess of the D'Urbervilles to Korea during the war, and there's so much tragedy in here, but Sonia is such a strong heroine to me. And I don't mean in terms of she has been given like a masculine gender role, which is something that we so often see. We don't see her as the stereotypes. We don't see her as the stereotypical tomboy that we often see within fiction to mean a strong female heroine. I mean that she is extremely well-rounded and has so many facets of an actual human woman. And whilst she does have her conflicts, and whilst you do feel for her because she is being pushed down by society and the treatment of her people during this time within the world, you still don't lose any sense that she is reacting to her circumstances as any other person would. She doesn't feel like a tool, she does feel like she feels human. And it made me feel more thoughtful, and as soon as I read this book, it was going on this list. This next book I finished on the 25th of April, and I will not lie, it is my favourite book of the year, and has been one book that I wanted to call my favourite book ever, but I haven't done that because I haven't reread the book yet. But that book is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This is a book that I had wanted to get into for years and had owned it for an exceptionally long time. I finally just decided to bite the bullet this year, and whilst I admit that the first 180 pages can be somewhat slow going after that, the book is an exceptionally rewarding experience, and I believe this can be said, it could be rewarding for all readers. Whilst the book is a somewhat masculine text, and I use the term masculine here to mean that it is full of men and their treatment of women is not necessarily the best, it does capture a period in American history extremely well, in my opinion. This book follows the characters of Gus and Cal, two former Texas Rangers, as they decide to go on a cattle drive after feeling somewhat disenchanted with their lives in Lonesome Dove. This is a coming-of-age novel, but all these characters are grown men, so it's more of like a coming-of-third-age novel. It is about men, again, rediscovering who they are, because they feel like after they no longer have this job of keeping Mexicans away from the border and shooting down Native American people, they feel like they've become somewhat disenchanted with life, disheartened. They are stuck in this town with not much happening, and from there it's this quest to find themselves again. And throughout this book it talks about the major themes that we see in all literature and we all want answers for. It talks about life, it talks about death, it talks about love, and to me it is just this brilliant novel. The prose seems so simplistic, again, like some of these books on here, but this year I found that I don't necessarily need lyrical prose, and I don't crave lyrical prose because I can sometimes find it a bit pretentious. And with that in mind, I have found that this year I have appreciated the more simplistic prose a lot better. Within this book, though, there are certain moments that McMurtry has written with such delicacy that they really caused me to stop and think. There were chapters within here that I read because they made me laugh, and I would go back and reread just that simple chapter whilst I was reading the book. So like, I'd be 300 pages and I go back 300 pages just to reread a chapter or to reread a paragraph. And I don't annotate books, I don't highlight books, I don't write down my favourite quotes because I like to rediscover them as I'm going back in, and because I'm somewhat lazy. But this book has definitely become a favourite of mine, and one that I feel like I'm going to treasure, I'm going to cherish, and I'm really looking forward to rereading it in New Year. And I am looking forward to taking a bit more time with the book to just really rediscover it and really capture it again and enjoy it. There are a few prequels and sequels to this book that I haven't bought and I don't own, simply because I worry that they will ruin the memory of this book, which has happened with other authors. There are other writers that I have on my shelves where I have only read one book of theirs and never gone back to read anything else by them because I worry that it would soil the memory of that first original book. And that's a horrible thing to say, but it's what's happened here so far. So when a few booktubers have finished reading some of the other books by Larry McMurtry, I'd be really interested in seeing what they have to say, because this is definitely the book out of all of these that I would recommend you go out and find first. It is huge. My copy here is 843 pages, but it is completely worth it, and I don't think that I would cut a single word. The next book that is on this favourite list is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce, and I finished this book on the 19th of August. It follows the character of Harold after he receives a letter from a former colleague and decides to walk the length of the country to reply to her. And it is on this walk and on this real journey that you understand that Harold is trying to cope with something and trying to understand something. And as he talks about his journey and talks about reaching Queenie, you begin to unravel just what has gone on between him and his wife for them to reach such a point as they are now so distant. Rachel Joyce this year has become one of my favourite writers. Unlike Lonesome Dove though, Harold Fry led me to go and read more of Joyce's works because I just was not ready to leave her characters behind. Once I finished listening to Harold Fry, I then went and listened to the Queenie Hennessy audiobook. I have since read her book of Christmas stories, A Snow Garden and Other Stories, And all of these stories has really just entered my heart because Joyce is such a phenomenal writer. She is a writer who definitely has an ear for dialogue, an ear for prose. You can tell that she has written radio plays before, but that works in her favour because it means that she understands how to make sentences sound so eloquent and how to make sentences work in this way that when they are read, they just feel they are so full of emotion and so powerful. There is a brilliance in her prose that I adore. I feel like it is almost classically British, as I will mention in another book that I'm going to discuss later on. She reminds me of Alan Bennett and the writers that I really adore, that inspire me and that I look up to. This is a story that I wish I had the physical book for, because whilst I really enjoyed listening to it, and I think that the books are definitely better whilst read, I would like to see how everything looks on the page. Next, I read Three Things About Elsie by Joanna Cannon. This is the proof copy and the book isn't officially out until January 2018, but I have seen on Twitter that it is on some shelves at some bookshops already, and that's the reason I'm putting this in here, because originally I had thought about holding off until the end of 2018, but I don't think that I can wait a year to discuss this book, because Three Things About Elsie, to me, is somewhat better than The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. The Trouble with Goats and Sheep, my favourite book of 2016, and Three Things About Elsie, whilst it hasn't been my favourite book of this year, is still on my favourite list, and is still fantastic, and to me surpasses The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. It talks about themes that I really like to see discussed. I like seeing older characters explored more in fiction, and I like Whitby and I like Battenberg. I just really enjoy this book. I think that the character of Flo is written in such a great fashion because she's a somewhat unreliable narrator. Joanna Cannon causes us to question Flo and her motivations and her character because she uses the common perception of older people against the reader. So we know ourselves that we are not necessarily the nicest to older people in this country. It's true, I work for an older people's charity, and I am never surprised by the amount of people that will really just shove their older relatives into community care or older people's homes without giving a second thought to how their relative will be cared for, and they do it to just forget about them. I will never forget the time that I received a donation of this woman's entire worldly goods because her only relatives live down south. She was up north in this home, and they've been told they had to clear out her possessions, and so they just brought everything to my shop. I'm talking like bags of her rubbish, I'm talking about her letters. It is the only time that a donation has made me so angry that I feel like I ought to write about it, because there was some really personal things within this donation and it made me feel such anger towards the customer. Obviously they weren't there for me to get angry towards them. I feel like so often we forget about older people, and Joanna Cannon here really forces us to challenge our own perceptions of older people and how we treat them within our society. The book also has Whitby in it, and Whitby is one of the places that I love most in the world. I haven't been to that many, but that is up there and will always be a favourite place. I just feel so at home there. Joanna Cannon is the writer that I say reminds me most of Alan Bennett. It has a somewhat talking head style to it, and it reminds me somewhat of the Thora Hird Talking Heads story that I can never remember, and if I do, if I find the clip on YouTube, I will link it, because that is what this book reminded me of. I love Alan Bennett's prose. I feel like he has a classic British voice. I feel like Joanna Cannon here has captured that voice and she has made it her own, and she writes very serious books that really get into the psyche, but there is a humour here. There is, once again, a delicacy. Joanna Cannon is able to write superbly, and I am so glad that this book exists, and I would definitely tell you all to go out and purchase this book when it is completely available on shelves in January. The next favourite I finished on the 8th of October, and that is Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk by Kathleen Rooney. And this book follows the character of Lillian Boxfish as she decides to take a walk. Similar to Harold Fry, but set in New York and exploring Lillian Boxfish's life, showing us, again, an older female character. She's 85 years old. She was one of the foremost people in advertising at this company she worked for. This book really talks about it talks about the gender wage gap. It talks about the fact that at Lillian's time of life, when she became pregnant, there really was no room for her to take maternity leave. She just had to leave the company, and that was expected of her because she was a mother. And it also talks about a woman who is incredibly capable, and she doesn't mind being on her own. She is a character who really understands the world around her and really questions people, and she understands people more than they think she will. And in this book you get to see a lot of how the world is changing around her and she isn't necessarily able to change with it. This book does show us some change in the character which you wouldn't necessarily expect. And this book's on here because, whilst I was reading it, Kathleen Rooney's prose reminded me somewhat of Dickens. Here I'm going to mention A Christmas Carol. Lillian Boxfish discusses her own past, her present and her future, and in doing so, it does feel somewhat like Scrooge being faced by all of these demons. And there is the ghost of these skyscrapers rising above her, which is it's the incoming of the future, this impending future that she doesn't feel part of, and you constantly feel like she is so small in this city. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I will admit that at the start of this book I did take some time to get into it, but there were just so many moments in here where I was rooting for the character and I really wanted to, be friends with her, and I wanted to know her in real life. The next book, it is by a booktuber. She is quite known, and I thought that it would be on quite a few favourites lists this year. And that is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. I finished this book on the 6th of November. I remember it well because I was sat in my car at work. And because I don't generally have a lot of time to read at the moment because of some things going on at home, I have been arriving at work a bit early just so that I can have some reading time on my own, or, as with Vlogmas, to record the Vlogmas videos. The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell is her first short story collection. I believe it might be her 6th book published, I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, but it's fantastic. I adore the stories within here. I think that most people know that Jen Campbell knows fairy tales, and within this book she has taken classic fairy tales and put new spins on them, and I just ended up really enjoying this book. I can't really go into why. I thought the prose was fantastic. I thought voices were captured perfectly. I liked the different individual stories within here. It felt magic. It reminded me of when I read Public Library and Other Stories by Ali Smith, which is my favourite short story collection, and this is why this had to go in here, because it is so reminiscent of great short stories, and Jen Campbell is definitely a writer that knows what she's doing, and the way she employs her craft is just completely astounding and brilliant, and I wish that I was able to write stories like this. That's basically the only thing there is to it. I thoroughly adore this book, and I know that a lot of people will already own it. It will already be on their favourites list, but if it isn't on your favourite list already, and if you do not own this book, then please go out and find yourself a copy, be it by buying it or be it by getting it from your local library, because these are stories that need to be read and they need to be absorbed, and I nearly reread it today, but I didn't because I kind of have a book that I've got to finish at the moment, but yeah. Great book. The next book I finished on the 7th of November is Winter by Ali Smith. And again, this is a book that I questioned putting on here simply because I did not like this book as much as Autumn. However, this book is fantastic. It is brilliant. There's no denying it. There's no denying that Ali Smith writes in such a lyrical fashion. She includes ideas and themes and mashes them all together. She requires her readers to do work. Although I have given away some of my Ali Smith books, I've given away 2 of them, but I got them from the charity shop. Although I have given those away, it doesn't stop me from recognising that Ali Smith is bloody phenomenal. Really enjoyed Autumn, and I do prefer Autumn to this book, but there is still so much in this book that you will get out of. It is memorable, it has stuck in my mind, albeit, you know, it's only been 2 months, but I still really enjoy this book. I really recommend this book. I like what it discusses, and there are things in here that I didn't know that I now know, and things that you have, you know, things that I didn't know but I can go and research them, and I kind of, as I've got older, I might be slowly agreeing with Raymond Carver that maybe your readers should do some of the work. I like that Ali Smith does sometimes require you to bring all of your own knowledge of literature and pop culture and just general knowledge really into reading her books, and I do like that she includes so much that you think you're getting a rather slim volume of prose and you think you'll fly through it, but you do have to stop and consider things, and that is why more people should be reading this book, and it should be on more of your TBRs. And last, but by no means least, the final book on this list is The Shepherd's Life by James Rebanks. I finished this book on the 29th of November. I've mentioned before, I come from a family of sheep farmers, so technically my father is a shepherd, my brothers are shepherds, my sister really trains dogs. I am almost a black sheep, if you will. I used to really enjoy the farming, the going up and helping my dad on the field, and then I reached an age where I really don't like dirt. And so I stopped going with my father in favour of going to my grandmother's. And it's fine because I have 3 brothers who really enjoyed it and kind of stuck to it their entire lives. But I found books. And James Rebanks found books, but he's someone who found books and then went back to farming. And whilst I do enjoy occasionally going and helping my dad during lambing time, it's not something that I'd really kind of push myself to do. I have a layman's knowledge of sheep farming, really. Yes, I did feel somewhat smart when Rebanks was having to put stuff in brackets, and I was like, I don't need the brackets, I understand that already. It was a bit different to see The Shepherd's Life in the Lake District, considering we're in the Peak District. But I felt an affinity with this book, and I liked how Rebanks wrote it. I think that this is how memoir should be written, how non-fiction should be written. When he talked about foot and mouth disease, I did get a bit sad, because it reminded me of a point in my life, well, a point in my father's life, a point in every sheep farmer's life, I think, which was incredibly terrible and is really vivid in my mind from being a child. And so this book had to be on here. It's been out for a few years now. I know that people have already read it and it has already become a favourite for a lot of people. Now it's a favourite for me as well, and a book that I have stolen off my sister's shelves for myself because I don't think she'll ever get around to reading it. Them's the books. I realise I went on for an exceptionally long amount of time there, but I really wanted to say enough that you would go out and you would find these books for yourselves and you would create your own opinions about them, because these are 10 fantastic books that I think that everybody needs to read. 2017 has been a rather good year for me in terms of reading, and compared to 2016, where I didn't really start off the year well and I found myself somewhat sad, 2017 has been a year where I felt somewhat content, and although I have had a lot of overtime at work, which has led me to be able to read more in my spare time because I've not felt like being able to do anything else, I have thoroughly enjoyed finding new authors and reviewing more, and although it has been a bit of a pain to know know most books that have been coming out, it has still been extremely fulfilling, and I would like to thank the lot of you for being here with me over the last year whilst I rambled about books and didn't necessarily read them that well and maybe had some strong opinions, but what else would you be here for? I hope that your 2018 is extremely prosperous, that your wishes are fulfilled, and that you have a good one, basically. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.